Welcome to my best, it's not necessarily meaning highlights, memories of NBA 2K online player control. In general, I absolutely despise modern NBA 2Ks, but up until NBA 2K25, let's talk about the specifics of that. It's linked in the description. There's a rant-tating video that's uncensored, specifically for Labyrinth Odyssey. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Um, there has been the online player control that has been a free mode that, as long as you have PlayStation Plus, Xbox Live sort of thing, or just play it on PC, you could theoretically have 5 online players in one team versus 5 online players in another team, all using individual players. Granted, sometimes they overlap, like there could be, you could play against the same player, like you use Giannis Antetokounmpo and the other opponent also using Giannis, but at least 5 different players on the same team against each other, and that made for quite a unique setup. And in a way, that's existed for as long as I've played NBA 2K online, and kind of in its modern format since I think at least NBA 2K16. But I didn't get into that in a bit. I guess to start off kind of in chronological order, the first time that I really did the whole player control type of thing, at least of the way that I played it back then, was NBA 2K11. They had it to where, at least for that one, it was actually one modern, like current of that time, of course, NBA team versus another team, and any of the starting 5, you ended up getting picked randomly. So it was quite a bit different than it is now, but in a general sense, it was still 5 online players in one team versus 5 on another. So 10 online people total back in 2010. Quite interesting. And frankly, to begin with, I sucked at it. From how I remember it, the way that it worked was the teams were tiered like they always have. And where the tier 1 teams would be the best in the league and the tier 3 teams would be in the worst. And it was 2 random teams of the same tier. It'd be how it is. And then those players in general you got randomly. So even if I got like insanely lucky and like in NBA 2K11 got the Lakers and I got Kobe, to begin with, honestly, I still kind of sucked. Because one, I was just a lot younger then, and then two, yeah, trying to shoot and PS3 era servers and internet and all that wasn't the dangest. Even still now, it's not like it really improved. But back then, the way that it worked is there actually wasn't a shot meter. There was just a tiny little flash that basically seemed like it was no more than just a few frames of when the optimal release point was, and that didn't actually even ever mean 100% chance of making the shot. That was just the optimal release point to have the best of it. If you shot that and even timed it absolutely perfectly shooting Shaquille O'Neal from full court, you still aren't going to hit that. That was just the optimal of doing it. But, I mean, granted, a wide open corner 3 with Ray Allen and you released it of the optimal point, there was probably an 80-90% chance you're going to hit it. But even still, the point being is that the shooting was a lot harder, but that was for everyone back then. So, in a way, it was actually realistic because it kind of kept with the NBA back then. It wasn't just orienting your offense completely around 3-pointers. That actually gave for kind of the rise of people to learn how to do the fancy dribbling and stuff like that. And actually back then, there weren't as many truly animation-based dribble moves to where there were obvious ones that were very much overpowered more than others, and to the point of even by most end of the years on an individual 2K, people would know which ones are the absolutely most glitchy to the point of not at all realistic and they would break the game. Back then, people could kind of just know the moves that each and individual player did best, like Kobe Bryant's dribble style would be different than LeBron's dribble style and stuff like that. And because there weren't a lot of extra animations added just so 2K could boast, oh, we have all these new animations this year, most of them broken and unrealistic. it was actually a quite fun game. Of course, there were still some players that were more overpowered than others, but I mean, that's a realistic, like in real life, too. I mean, if you want to go back and watch videos of whatever mode it may be, and back in that era of like someone like Chris Smoove would figure out the individual jump shot that he could do best and the dribble moves and stuff like that. But even still, it was kind of to each individual instance of what they liked best, or even what they put on their absolutely best case circumstance of like a my player or something. In terms of the mode where it was random of what team and of what player they got, well, of course, there was a skill gap. Overall, it was just fun. People would be on a wide scale stuff from downright awful, like you get of any and all 2K, to amazing, to where it's crazy that you could play with the same person twice and they would get, like, a random defensive center that couldn't shoot and still dominate. And then the next game get Ray Allen and still dominate. It's just insane of how that would work. And I told this story before, but frankly, I can't even remember what channel. Really, the first time that I actually even got good at the game wasn't even until 2K12. I sucked kind of throughout the entirety of 2K11, but ultimately it was still a fun game mode to play. I played more of the my player or my career, whatever, back then, and some of that online 2K11. But 2K12 actually got somewhat better at that individual part of the game. And the first time that I was actually able to get an A plus teammate grade, which they have kept through the years, you can take as you may of what year was harder or whatever to get that. But again, 2K12 on PS3 era hardware and shooting and all that wasn't actually heinous. And the first time I actually ever got an A plus teammate grade was with Manu Ginobili and the San Antonio Spurs. And that was kind of ironic too, because it was the same setup as 2K11. It was the random teams and the random players. In 2K12, Manu Ginobili wasn't even a starter. A lot of times in his career, he didn't actually start. So with those modes too, and I mean theoretically, to be realistic, because NBA teams did it, but realistically, it was because you could put in who you used to, or just put in an absolutely terrible player to do stupid stuff at the end of the game if you're way up or whatever. Actually, subbed out of whoever the starting shooting guard was. I don't think it was Kawhi. I think he might have been the small forward. But to put, let's just say it's Danny Green or something. I don't know if that's right. And put in Ginobili, who I don't even think that I recall ever at all used to, but I was actually still able to shoot about 80% with him, even some jump shots in there too. And I mean, by the end in 5 minute quarters, I think I had something like 12 or 15 or something like that points and like 4 or 5 assists and like 2 rebounds. But I was able to get like 3 steals and lock up Kobe Bryant, who's probably still, at least in NBA 2K terms, the second best player of any modern player behind LeBron in 2K12. And that was actually someone that played the game a whole heck of a heap. I can't remember the exact PSN name, but I know I ran it enough to definitely recognize that name. And I was actually able to lock up Kobe Bryant in 5 minute quarters to where he scored like 6 points, shooting 25% from the field, had like 5 turnovers and like a D player, teammate, whatever rating. And I had an actual A plus from playing defense and finding teammates and all that. And then ultimately, lowly Spurs ended up beating the probably second best team, because by then there was the Heat, Lakers. Again, it was in tiers, but I think actually the 2012 season the Spurs weren't as good. That's when people started calling them old, and then lo and behold, they still won another championship later on, but still. The point being is, getting older by that point, Manu Ginobili off the bench was able to torch very near his prime Kobe Bryant, and was still probably in the game rated like a 95 or 96 or something like that overall. So that was fun, and that was the beginning of me being motivated to do it. But honestly, I didn't even get another 2K until NBA 2K15. Yeah, 13 to 14 of like those actual years. I had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life, which I've discussed before. I'm like my story video and stuff. So in general, I didn't have as much time to play online actual games back then. It was mainly just Gran Turismo, and again, that's because that's what my parents sort of allowed back then. I told that story with the whole GT Academy and stuff too. So other than Gran Turismo, I barely paid anything online between like once 2K12 online ended to 2K15, but then I got NBA 2K15 as well. So actually, by the time it happened, there was much more in depth for the My Player. So I did that mainly for playing online, and in my 2K16, it was getting more that my team was getting more popular. So I did that more than anything. I still did do some player control, miscellaneous stuff like that in 2K15 and 16, but I don't really have as much straightforward memories of those. My times were mainly spent with, other than the offline stuff like my GM and all that I'd always do, whatever. Yeah, maybe it's more 2K15, I focused on my career, my player. 2K16, I focused more on my team. And again, it was a while before I got another 2K, because I even noticed drop between 2K15 and 16, and then 2K17 was getting even worse to use, and universally 2K18 was absolutely hated. But I ended up actually getting 2K19 mainly because 2K18 was so awful that relative to the reviews of that game, 2K19 looked good when it came out, but then I'll talk my whole story from that. Even of like live, back when that game still had its online and stuff, and it was the newest in the series, of how at the time, and I still truly and really believe that at the time, it was the worst video game of all time in terms of the microtransactions. Is the absolute heinous putting like mature rated ads for like actual shows of outright killing and all that on streaming services back then in 2K19 that was promoted children and all that. That was terrible. Snowpiercer, I think, was like the most egregious nothing for against that show. I never watched it, but that pissed off a lot of people on an E-rated game. Yeah, and not to mention all the microtransactions and stuff, but again, this is meant to be more positive video. But the point being is that even back then, I could still play the free of the player control. And by then, it morphed into, again, maybe they had it in the older modes too, but at least it wasn't as much what I played. In terms of what I actually played, it morphed into to where it wasn't an individual team versus the individual team and then the players on that team. You could pick of whatever players that you wanted in a tier, always and forever. It was tier 1 was the best and tier 3 was the worst. So, like in 2K19, like a tier 1 point guard would be Stephen Curry, and then a tier 3 point guard would be any of the bench warmers, and then maybe about the highest that you could get back then, I think, was Ben Simmons, but I purposely say that on purpose because early in the game in 2K19, Ben Simmons was the best point guard in the game for player control, and 2K actually noticed that. They worked on that mode back then as much as the terrible paid for modes back then. At least they put a little bit of effort into some of the unpaid stuff too, and by pretty much popular request, even though I'd absolutely torch people with them, they moved Ben Simmons to power forward because he played some of both back then. So instead of having a 6'10" point guard with like 90 something speed and enough strength where he could post up any other point guard in the league at the time, and pretty much any other point guard of all time other than Magic Johnson, which you had to finish the entirety of all the unlocks, basically third team versus team, because player and player wouldn't have the odds to do it. We'll get into that later, of the specific odds and it being an exploit. But yeah, you had to be the best of the best to even unlock Magic Johnson. The rest of the rest could use Ben Simmons. So everyone, like, yeah, even as a tier 3, is better than the rest of the tier 1s, unless you absolutely perfectly knew Stephen Curry's shot, or occasionally, again, the best of the best would be able to do something with some of the all-time players, but they were the best of the best. Any of those who weren't the absolute greatest, it was mostly Ben Simmons or occasionally Stephen Curry. And the point I'm making is even in 2K19, when I was in the middle of college and I'm pissed off of the rest of the game and all that, and still overall mainly playing Gran Turismo and all that, I don't have an absolute proof of it. In hindsight, I should have uploaded that as a standalone video, and I do kind of regret that. And it is really just to trust me on it, but there was a point to where I went against an actual player controlled Stephen Curry, like it didn't just immediately leave. And in 2K19, I was able to do 43 points, 10 rebounds, 12 assists, 4 steals, and 3 blocks, and like 1 turnover. Shooting, I can't remember the exact amount, but I think it was at least like 75%. Granted, probably didn't hit the free throws, but whatever. And that's Stephen Curry, who actually stayed the entire game, so that helped me out, granted, because it kind of gave up towards the end, so you can take that as you may. All of this in 5-minute quarters, by the way, if I haven't already said that. I had something like 4 points, 2 assists, 6 turnovers, and shot like 15%. Granted, you could argue which was more impressive, 2K12 with the worst player being able to lock down Kobe Bryant, or 2K19 with the most glitchy player being able to lock down another glitchy player. You can take that as you may. But in terms of all 2Ks ever of online with an individual player performance, that was my proudest moment. There was another time on 2K11 team versus team that I was able in 5-minute quarters to score 48 points with Ray Allen, and I think I told that story before. Too, but frankly, the other player that was using the Lakers, so it was a good team, and theoretically Kobe Bryant was on Ray Allen, but the strategy for that guy was just try and double team the point guard before I get the ball up the court, and using Kobe Bryant to do so. So Ray Allen was open, so that was kind of my first kind of taste of being able to dominate someone like ass to belt sort of thing. Because Rondo had just good enough ball control and stuff to where even Kobe couldn't steal it most of the time, so I'd just pass it up to Ray Allen and shoot a 3 real quick on the essentially fast break every possession because of pressing, full court press with Kobe and the point guard. But yeah, so you can kind of combine all the 3 performances, which was best to me. But to me, it was 2K19 with Ben Simmons. So that was some of the most fun that I ever had because of glitchy forever. Granted, you can say that, oh, that was the beginning of it getting so glitchy and unrealistic and stuff. But, I mean, realistically, 2K19, 2019, whatever, was right about the prime of Ben Simmons' career. It's sad to say in a lot of ways, but, I mean, even still, in real life, he wasn't much of a scorer when you could pretty much score it well in that game, because even if Watts and not as bad as they were, then height still ran the game. If you were 4 inches taller than another player's stats really didn't matter. You were going to be able to score unless the shot was blocked. And by the time you were 6 or 7 inches taller than a player, even how skilled the defender was, it could not be blocked. So granted, you could foul Ben Simmons, and that worked pretty well, but you could only foul 5 times. On the 6th, you're kicked out completely, so still. The point being is, unless you had a point guard of at least 6'5", you couldn't even get a block, and anyone under like 6'3" or so could not defend whatsoever against him, and yeah. In real life, Simmons still averaged something like almost 20 points a game, a whole heck of a heap of assists and rebounds and stuff, and was in contention for Defensive Player of the Year. Back then, he was kind of considered the best Swiss Army knife type player of the entire league. He could guard anyone. He could score on about anyone in certain ways. He was too big for guards to guard him. He was too fast for forwards and centers to guard him. He just couldn't shoot it all, so people could back way up, and that ended up being a downfall later on. But still, like in that era, Ben Simmons was pretty close to that in real life too, so it wasn't incredibly unrealistic, but also it made it to where that was the first time of purely just playing the player control actually get a good enough percent. I think it had to be at least for a few times in a row out of a 10 game span getting at least a 60% win percentage and also not losing 3 in a row at any time. Of those going in my favor too, because again, I could also choose Ben Simmons and that helped too. Granted, a lot of others did, but any time they didn't, that was pretty close to a surefire win as long as the teammates weren't complete idiots. I was actually able to unlock the lower end of the legend players, because the way that it worked back then is you just unlock different tiers of legendary, whether it's the player or the team on the individual level from like junior varsity or something like that to greatest of all time or something along the lines of that, I think, in terms of what win percentage that you got in a span of 10 games and also throughout any of it couldn't lose 3 in a row. So, in the worst tier of the legendary players, I was actually able to unlock Ryan Scalabrine. So that actually started some Scalabrine holly. Granted, in 2K19, more often than not, I wasn't actually able to keep the tier up enough to have him unlocked. So mainly, probably the players I used in 2K19 was early on a whole heck of a heap of Ben Simmons. Once it was patched, a few months into the game, I think it was patched. I can't remember the exact time, but it was before even Christmas. A lot of times I'd use Giannis onto the Kumbo because he kind of came into his own then and Greek Freak and all that in the beginning of his rise, and he was just something unique at the time. I was never really skilled enough to be an insane shooter like with Stephen Curry or whoever it may be. I just never really had that type of skill on any 2K. But at the times I could unlock Brian Scalabrine, that was outright amazing. That worked well to start getting clips and stuff too. So 2K19 arguably was probably the peak of me enjoying that mode in terms of playing it normally and stuff. In 2K20, the game was free on PlayStation Plus, so I was able to start playing it in like April or May or whenever it was. It ended up free, so I was well behind the curve in terms of skill gap and stuff, and I focused more on my team with that one too. So it wasn't as much of playing the player control one because I was late to it, and two because there was some my team. Granted, as you saw videos even on this channel, I did some my team of 19 as well. But as I said again, with my team and all that, I actually ended up being shadow banned. I still have absolute proof of that because I talked negative towards all that, and 2K19 shadow banning it's still proof of that if you want to look. So 2K20 overall less motivation, less focus. I was not going to play the game whatsoever, except I ended up free PlayStation Plus, which I think was the first time they actually did that. So that was interesting too. But that actually, because it was the first time they ever had it free on PlayStation Plus, so many people were late to the party that, and COVID as well, too, by then. It was a perfect hit. It was like May 2020 when that happened. So a mix of the first time it ever being free on PlayStation Plus and lockdowns and stuff, there were so many people that were absolutely terrible at the game in 2K20. As much as I was probably better at some individual play styles and stuff in 2K19, there were so many awful people in 2K20 at the absolute best of tiers and stuff that I was even able to unlock the tier 2 legend players, which probably means average, even when I only played the player control, still probably averaged 63% win percentage. I can't remember the exact span I had to get of a 10 game to have that unlocked at any given time, but still. Of my actual percentage of winning games was probably higher then. Granted, there's about as much a chance you'd have a stupid teammate either or, but the point being is if you could, again, kind of belt to ass sort of thing. of a stupid teammate when you got the opportunity is you could be an average player, but if you could absolutely destroy someone stupid, even if you could do AI to whoever offense, by 2K20 you could kind of start doing that. You could press triangle if you're facing a certain player, and then if you were playing against someone stupid enough, you could even get the AI to cut to the basket, and you could kind of exploit it. With that, which the triangle cut, as it ended up being called, ended up, in hindsight, being incredibly overpowered, especially in later 2Ks, so they had to nerf that. So again, I was kind of doing a glitchy thing, but it wasn't really as known in 2K20. But the point being is not from my own play, but just of enough new people to it. At the very highest, I was actually able to get to the tier 2 legendary players, which means that the best of them was Yao Ming. Of all things considered, they were definitely higher overall players and much more well known and stuff, but Yao Ming was 7'6", so this is the best player in the game. Like, not over exaggerating in slightest. Tier 1 obviously had the best of the best, like Michael Jordan, LeBron, all that, but no, Yao Ming was the best player in the game. Up through probably 2K22, height was the most important thing over anything. Over animations, over badges, over stats, whatever it may be, height was the most important thing. And Yao Ming even had decent stats anyway, so he wasn't an outright liability on defense or anything like that. But on offense, he was literally unstoppable. What you did is you hold L2, which is post up. You did that for about 3 seconds on anyone other than Yao Ming or Mark Eaton, pretty much. Anyone like 7'3" or under, you could do that, and automatic score. You didn't even really have to do much skill. Occasionally, I would do post spin or post hook or whatever to change stuff up if someone had a long enough wingspan to get a block, like Wilt Chamberlain, a long wingspan, or Shaq strong enough to where if I couldn't get position or whatever, so I had to post spin or whatever to get ahead of them. But other than individual circumstances, it was probably at least 80% of the time was literally just get the ball anywhere pretty much within the 3-point line, hold L2 for about 3 seconds, press square as much as you wanted. You didn't have to time anything, and 2 points. You probably shot at least 75% of the from field goal percentage any and all time. Shaquille O'Neal could kind of guard Yao because Shaq was strong enough to Yao couldn't get all that position, so that's where it kind of got into post hook, in which he did have to time. So by not exactly today's internet, that somewhat iffy. So maybe if I had a post hook, it was more 55 to 60% field goals. So occasionally it was worth passing and stuff. Or if I was against like Mark Eaton, who's the best defender of his era, I think maybe still all-time leader of blocks per game. I think he might even still be. And 7'4" and really strong, and then obviously Yao himself at 7'6". Yeah, not so much. But other than like those 3 players, or like Wilt Chamberlain with the 8-foot wingspan, so only if he could get a block. Still, there was enough of a height difference where if there wasn't a block, it's still an automatic score, but people were just gonna well kick it blocked. So other than really those 4 players, yeah, was completely unstoppable, and that's me, not much talent. The first time I ever actually used them as well. That wasn't just a lot of people knew the game or whatever at the time. That could be someone extremely skilled that knew exactly what they're doing, and they would have, like, Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic, or even some of the all-time players as well. I mean, if it had Kareem, it could score on the other end because it's faster. Again, a lot of people would use Yao as well, so to neutralize it, neither of us would really shoot all that much. And that was quite interesting too. But of all that considered, probably the best individual game that I had with Yao was something on the lines of maybe 40 points and 18 rebounds or something. Arguably better than the Ben Simmons game, but it was against an AI from the left quickly, so it was kind of unfair. I think the AI was Bam Adebayo, so it was literally just hold L2 for a little bit and press square, and it was automatic every cotton picking time. Granted, sometimes I forgot to say this before, too, is people could double team and that could kind of be effective because Yao Ming obviously doesn't have much of ball control, so somebody just went to double team and then you pass. So either they rotate to that player that you're expected to pass to, so then hopefully you're going to pass the ball again to someone that eventually be open, or they don't rotate and players will automatically open, whatever it may be. So it's either automatic score or double team, I guess, for that too. But when you're going against AI, someone, an actual player, then has to manually double team. But there was also a game as well to where it was Yao Ming versus Yao Ming, and I think it was something like 16 points ultimately. And a lot of that was on second chance and getting rebounds and stuff because neither of us could score on either of us. But that would go for any and all circumstances. I had something like 16 points, 23 rebounds in 5-minute quarters. So 16 points, 23 rebounds, like 4 assists or something like that. I didn't have them all that much. And 10 blocks. Again, I should have put that one. I think I actually had a screenshot. I think it maybe at some point actually showed a screenshot of it somewhere or another, I think, with the 10 blocks. I think if you look hard enough, there actually is something along the lines of that around, even if it was on Rantating or something. It seems like I was more active. Save that. So in 5-minute quarters, I had 10 blocks. So that was quite something new. And that was probably my best defensive performance. Again, unless it was directly against AI or something like that. Maybe it was someone there initially, but left real quick. And it was AI 80% of the game. Plus, of best offensive and defensive performances against actual online players who stayed the whole game. That was it. And of course, like 2 or 3 of those blocks was someone beyond my matchup too. Someone just trying to get past their own player, and I happened to be able to time it correctly and get the block there. But yeah, most of that was against other Yao Ming. So yeah, triple double there on blocks. Probably in total, maybe had 5 or 6 triple doubles again in 5-minute quarters. So of course they're going to be wearing in all of 2K player control, and I think the rest of them were basically all against AI, whether it's from the very beginning or quickly on. The person actually left, and again, the other two being the Ben Simmons one in 2K19 that I already talked about, or the Yao Ming one in 20. So you could say to some degree I fell off. And frankly, that is probably true 2K21 and 22. Because 2K21, I actually only had a chance to play at the very tail end because by the time that I got an Xbox Series S, 2K21 was at the very end of it being on Game Pass, and it never ended up free that year for PlayStation Plus. So I only played a tiny bit of 2K21, so yeah, I was definitely worse there. I never even unlocked any extra tiers for that, so ultimately I'm not even sure if there ended up being player control clips for 21. I played it a little bit, and I think I did do a little bit of a Rantating video of it. The top individual clip, I think, ended up being the cock block of the game. So, yeah, there was that. And I don't even think that actually ended up uploading to my main channel, and I just thought of or on my YouTube channel, actually. It's on Library and Odyssey for Barrett and Mopar. I don't think it ended up on this one yet, so maybe that could be a short or something, because I just haven't thought about that. So 2K21 wasn't much, but I didn't have much something to play. 2K22, it's kind of, again, going more towards my team there, because the entire time there on Xbox Live, I had to play it while it was free on there, but there actually was a little bit of that, because 2K22 was when there started being truly and really generations of it. So 2K22, I actually noticed that there was quite a big difference in playing of what is now current gen, back then called next gen, so like Series S generation of what I had, of the player control versus the old gen of player control, and where I'd had always actually played the old gen kind of by default too, of course. I was better at that one, so while more people were playing what is current gen now, newer gen back then, because that was the new thing, I actually noticed that I could sort of kind of ball out and have more fun with the old gen. I implemented that actually more into my strategy of my team and stuff like that. But it would also kind of work with the player control as well. And really, about the only highlight in 22 is at its most, again, I only unlocked the lower end there. But again, I'm pretty sure there's a clip of it somewhere or another, I think. Yeah, that. I'm trying to think. It's Rantain or main channel. Or whatever. Lo and behold, though, is even though I might have been better with the current gen, the online was so absolutely atrocious, and either you couldn't actually shoot with 2K22. There's a clip of one game I actually tried to use Steve Novak once I unlocked the legends, because for some reason one version of him was a small forward. So it's interesting using a 6'10 small forward that could shoot the lights out, but then the online connection wasn't good enough, so I couldn't actually shoot. So that's really all that happened in 2K22. It's certainly interesting because that was the beginning of the difference between the current gen and next gen, so that kind of had a new spin on things. It wasn't really the most usable piece of servers. Absolutely terrible for Xbox. I will say that year I only ever played on Xbox because it wasn't free for PlayStation Plus, but 2K23 is completely different. It's free on PlayStation Plus. Granted, a whole heck of heap of 2K23 stories I have already told, so some of it you've seen, and plenty of individual clips too, but 23, as you can tell by, again, the stories and clips and stuff, was the year of Brian Scalabrine, the White Mamba, Vanilla Godzilla, the man, the myth, the Mamba, the goat. Yeah, in 2K23, there's a glitch that I have already explained, so I won't go a whole heck of too much into because it's even more relevant now that you can't play the game. But essentially, if you did the dashboard, is the term for it, but go on with PS4. I don't know if it worked for other systems, but PS4 specifically. But if you actually press the PS button and go specifically to network, and then for online connection, spam the check mark on and off enough times to where if you did that 3 or 4 times and just spamming it on and off, the game didn't count. So if you were losing and whatever, it could be the player control or team versus team. I did team versus team maybe like 3 times total, and that one, probably the most I ever did team versus team was probably 2K20, I think, because there was a whole heck of a heap of new players. And there are some clips in there. That's actually in it. That one I know for sure is on Rantating. That was where they were iffy about judging the percentages of wins. That one's definitely in Rantating. I remember that specifically. But yeah, either or for 2K23. Because before, the only way that you could unlock the best of the best legendary players in Tier 1 was doing it team versus team, and frankly, I just wasn't really as interested in doing that because that needed a lot more strategy and stuff and understanding in each individual for each individual each individual team for each individual areas, like playbooks and stuff. When you could just use one play, all you had to know was that player shot released to some extent. Granted, usually in whatever 2K it was, the internet wasn't good enough to shoot a whole heck of a heap, and I used Brian Scalabrine, so yeah, I'll take that as you may. It was real smart of me. But in my best ever games were against using non-cheaters with Simmons and yeah. So yeah, the point being that frankly it was this last memorization with that. If I were to have a whole heck of a heap of practice team versus team, I could probably figure out more of that. I just didn't really feel like dedicating the time for that. But yeah. The point being is in 2K23, I was actually even able to unlock the Tier 1 legendary players with that, but there was quite a few, not everyone. Some people were extremely surprised by it. But probably in any given time, again, it was by that time being free on PlayStation Plus, it was already like April, May or something. On any given game, probably at least 20% of the players were using the Tier 1 Legend players, which is higher than any other year, because it's obvious glitch that 2K never even bothered to fix. So, I mean, yeah, I had my fair share using the Tier 1 players like Kareem, or height wasn't as big of a deal there, so Yao wasn't as overpowered. So Kareem probably was slightly better than Yao, but given their ratings, it still wasn't exactly fair. Kareem at a 98 or whatever, and then Yao at a 92 or whatever, they're still too close to than they should have been. But it's not really as much of the point. The point being is, yeah, I used them, and probably the most unique was for some reason they had the all-time, like, the legend player of Giannis Antetokounmpo as a small forward. So that was probably the most unique there. 6'11", incredibly fast small forward, and actually for those that that deserved to be to the best of the best here. Actually, could even shoot threes with Giannis and stuff. That's any and all years, but for some reason in 2K23 they also had him as a small forward. So it's actually someone that outright did the Reggie Miller style, get the ball, run to the 3-point line, and then shoot the three, but with small forward Giannis, and did that too. I think there is actually a little bit of a clip of that. It was in terms of other stuff too. I think at the time I was using Scalabrini, so that was just one individual instance in like a clip compilation or something. But yeah, and in terms of an individual looking at someone else doing stuff, that's probably baked into my memory forever. It's someone doing the Reggie Miller, get the ball and then run back to the 3-point line and shoot the three with Giannis, and absolutely greened it and shot probably 80% from three through the game and scored like 40 something points, mainly just shooting three with Giannis. That was incredible. I don't know why 2K ever decided to make Giannis a small forward, but yeah, in 2K23, at least with the Legend, Giannis was a small forward. So if I was using Legend players, that's mainly what I knew for Tier 1. I guess in general, the Tier 1 go-to, because this is the only time I ever gotten it. In Tier 1, for Legend, the point guard, the Magic, and again, any and all two guys that wasn't really skilled enough to shoot with. Curry. And even still, Tier 3, too, and even other years too, 2K22 and 1, if you were able to unlock the legendary players, you could actually use Ben Simmons again at point guards. It wasn't quite to the 2K19 era because height didn't matter as much, and this 2K19, the way that game played, oriented more towards Simmons than of later 2Ks. Not just a height thing, but the style in which the game got sort of ran and stuff. But still, it would be Tier 3 Legend and use Simmons Tier 2. I'd try not to get point guard because I don't like. Tier 1 Legend Magic. Shooting guard Tier 3 Legend Tracy McGrady. Tier 2, I think for the most part, I try and skip. Tier 1 was either Tracy McGrady, Kobe, Jordan, quite a few that are decent. For small forward, there wasn't really anyone, even of current players, that I liked. I like a heap. I tried the Legend LeBron a little bit and was all right. Legend KD, all right, but by far it was Giannis. If I was ever power forward, I'd do my absolute daniest to get Scalabrini. Whether it's current players or whatever. If it ended up they couldn't get Scalabrini, I'd just go with current Giannis. Of the legendary players, some people could figure out the Tier 1, Kevin Garnett, and really for Tier 2 or 3, there was no one that anyone really liked. Power forward was the least desirable position, which actually helped to bring you Scalabrini too. You saw the highlights and stuff too. And there were less people who just tried to sweat at the power forward too, so that actually created more highlights for Scalabrini. But if people were to sweat at power forward, it was usually using Kevin Garnett all time too. People could figure out how to shoot the threes with him as well, so that was interesting. And then for center, tier 3, probably my best overall game in terms of 2K23, actually came a tier 3 legendary center using Arvydas Sabonis. He was actually in tier 2 legendary as well, but tier 2, if I happen to choose at a time, I'd go with Yao. So his tier 2 legendary was a little bit better than his tier 3, but they were basically the same. The only difference between the tier 2 was slightly faster. In terms of this, it's kind of irrelevant. In my best game in 2K23 of any player, even like with the all-time Giannis or whatever, was tier 3 Arvydas Sabonis. I had like 18 points or something like that. But I had 26 rebounds and 10 assists. And the other player stayed for something like 4 blocks too. Sabonis could do full court passes. He's probably the only center, right? Jokic, I'm sure. I never actually used Jokic in 23 that I can remember. I'm going to say Jokic and Sabonis are the only 2 centers in the entire game that could do full court passes accurately, which is fairly realistic, I guess. But whatever. So I could be inbounding and then I could throw it all the way to the rim, not alley-oop, but close enough to where if they had momentum, could easily dunk it. So that was something fun to always do with Sabonis too, is you could just lob it all the way up there. And then also he's 7'3", so you get a whole heck of a heap of rebound. Offensively, he was not at all as good as Jokic. Height didn't run the game as much by then, so of course if you were going up against like a 6'10" center or someone that didn't know what they were doing, you'd score. It was Sabonis, but the main thing, he was probably the second best passing center in the entire game of any level other than Jokic. And he was also 7'3" and strong, so he could get rebounds with the best of them too. So yeah, it's like 84 overall, and the tier 3 one couldn't even really shoot threes. It was like a C- with a slow release. 84 overall center that barely anyone had heard of. When they say Sabonis, most people thought of its son by then. Getting 28 or 26 or whatever it was, rebounds and 10 assists, but this is certainly an interesting thing with that. It's actually, speaking of random tier 3 centers, made me think too, is it wasn't really all that relevant, but also in 2K19, I think he might have been a rookie or second year or something like that. In 2K19, it was more about height, which also included wingspan, plus he was fast for a center. Too, now that I think of it, random memory, and I just now thought of in 2K19 as well. Sometimes in 2K19, if I decided to use tier 3, if I wasn't to the point of having the legends unlocked, and that was after Ben Simmons got patched, it's still pretty rare, but there's probably at least 15-20 games I used them. I would use Mo Bamba, you probably know more from that song, than anything at center, and there was one game in particular to where I never really did a whole heck of a bomb on offense unless it was against someone incredibly slow or incredibly not knowing what they're doing. I could sort of run fast and get a score in a fast break. So probably only averaged like 4 points a game or something, Bamba. But he was one of the best defenders in the game. He had almost no strength whatsoever, but unless it was like going against Shaq or something like that, it didn't really matter. He had a 7'11" wingspan. I guess. He's still technically in the league, but his wingspan doesn't matter as much now. So yeah, I ended up going against Wilt Chamberlain, who's pretty much 99 in every stat in terms of post. And I locked him up and he left the game. I can't remember the exact specifics of that because he left pretty early. But yeah, I'm going to get someone with Wilt Chamberlain that tried to go up on me like every game. I didn't get a whole heck of heap of blocks or anything. It was enough of a contest, or even if the statistical numbers didn't really show it. Yeah, I was able to keep Wilt Chamberlain shooting like 30% from the field, and they were trying to run the offense around opponent Wilt, and probably took at least 10 shots on me by the time he left. So yeah, that was an interesting thing too that I just thought of. Usually I just stand in the corner with my mama, and then if enough happened over there, I could get an open three and shoot with some Orphos again going against incredibly slow center. I could score occasionally on a fast break. But yeah, Bamba was a randomly good defender in 2K19. That's the story, and I just now remember. Of course, it's not chronological order. But still, that is a random cool thing that I just thought of. But anyway, the point being is that, yeah, of course, throughout the years, there's a whole heck of a heap of glitches and stuff. But ultimately, the thing that I ended up playing most of any individual years, I'm sure there might have been years where I ultimately played more, especially 2K19, because I got that game on release. I'm almost certain I played more total games of the online player control 19. But in terms of using an individual player the most amount of times on any and all games, well, it's 2K23 Brian Scalabrine. The course of individual glitches and all that, any and all throughout the years. Another random story, too, is I didn't use them all that much, especially for being at the Kentucky Wildcats fan. That's kind of sad. When Anthony Davis' prime of his career in 2K19, I used them probably 10 games in total in the thing. But one game I randomly just using the stick shooting, and back then you could get some slightly early and slightly late shooting go in. I just randomly got lucky and had RNG on my side. I actually saw 8 from 10 from 3 at Anthony Davis, and granted, I think that was against AI, but still. The point being is there were always glitches, either back then when you didn't even have to time your shots and they could go in, or he's an incredibly tall player back when it could be used, or whatever it may be. Oddly enough, the games in which I used the least amount of glitches were in NBA 2K11 and 12 when no one really cared about being competitive, or in 2K23, the very last one I played, where I could have extremely been glitching and used a tier 1 legendary player every cop pick and time. I'd have decided to use Brian Scalabrine, who had a pretty fast release, to be fair. But a lot of the times, the actual online connections throughout everyone wasn't even really good enough to shoot. As you saw, too, with the 15-0 run video and the highlights, I shot no jumpers, scowl, on that. A 15-0 run at the very end of the game, and granted, it was also somewhat RNG based, to be fair. I was able to bait some people that wanted to take every shot into terrible shots. There was another player on my team that actually could score, and then I was able to pass enough to where it worked out when needed, or score through mismatches of AI and fast break. No jump shots whatsoever. So, on the tail end of the spectrum, either or, you could have been a glitch if you really wanted to in NBA 2K11 or 12, because it was before the online tutorials, before people were super competitive at it, or at the very end when there was a glitch where you could actually even get the best players of all time, were the 2 times I decided not to be glitchy, and arguably were probably the times I had the most fun with. Of course, in individual games, when I absolutely dominated in whatever 2K it may be, were awesome, but in terms of just game by game, of no one in particular, just having fun of a consistent amount, was of the beginning and the end of doing it. I probably played at least 300 of the online player control games in 2K23 alone, so probably going on 500 total, with between all the 2Ks combined, 2K19 to 23 combined, with Scalabrine. And my best game, I think, actually ended up being the one that you saw. It ended up being the 15-0 run. Probably on average, maybe average like 5 points a game of him shooting maybe 45% or so. And realistically, the matchup probably averaged like 8 or 9 points if regularly played better. I mean, just look at the stats of the players. Scalabrine should be a 7,300 overall, but for some reason they had him as a 73, so that's not fair. But the point being is I would try my best to give the max effort, and it was fun. It was a strategy type thing. Using not exactly the dandiest player, with not exactly the dandiest online connection to be able to shoot and all of that, I was still actually even able to make it work to where in over 300 games, still had fun. Of course, there were some blowouts both ways. Y'all, again, the clips are on the channel. There's funny of the epic comeback to cut it to 36 or whatever. I mean, there was a lot of highlights of that even on the channel. And again, it's only really 5% of the total. content on whatever game it may be that even makes anything. So yeah, of course, the vast majority of games, it wasn't super interesting. But it was still fun just knowing that I could chill and not really have to focus a whole heck of a heap and use a player that I liked without having to do any crazy cheats or glitches or spending money. Any of that, and actually have fun in what's overall outright terrible game. Of course, in the vast majority of what people play of modern 2Ks, which probably any of like the current generation console, like 2K21 onward, is monetized to hell. They're absolutely awful, and I have a whole heck of a heap of videos and a whole heck of a heap of channels about that, obviously. Well, I get 2 channels, but still a whole heck of a heap of videos between them. The point being is everybody really and truly always knows about that. And even with the player control, it actually ended up getting more popular as the years went on. By 2K22 or so, as I talk about in the Rant Tate video, which is again linked in the scripts, and that one's important too. In a different way, some more in the negatives and stuff of it, but in terms of positive too, is there actually ended up being more of a community for the player control. You like Vlad Wavy, who was actually able to even end up tying it into his career after a while, probably ended up most famous through doing the online player control games. Probably overall now he does more of the team versus team, and that's overall it's probably still what's more popular, to be fair. But the sad part about it is actually even 2K25, because they want to focus people on the other modes they can monetize, they got rid of the player control altogether for the current gen, like PS5 era. And even in past gens, it's not at all optimized, which again I discussed more in the Rant Taten video that hopefully, if all goes right, is linked in the description. At the very least, will be in comment that will be pinned. So there's that. Too. So yeah, sadly, it all kind of ended up just fizzling out. And it pretty much failed in terms of staying realistic and all that too. Even if you look at people's highlights in 2K24, it's not exactly the game that the game is the most realistic. People that could figure out how to green the shot could pretty much green literally anything and score 80 points or whatever too. That's definitely happened to some extent in the past, but in the past, yeah, there were plenty of games where I remember in like 2K19 or 20 or whatever, someone using Tracy McGrady and scoring like 60 or 70 points, or one time in one particular circumstance, I remember someone using Donovan Mitchell to score a whole heck of a heap in 23. But all of those would be against either broken AI that were not programmed correctly, and there was one particular move that they could not guard, or against a user that just did not at all play defense or care whatsoever. By 2K24, it was such in a glitched way that someone could play an absolutely perfect defense as possible, and still someone that knew exactly what they were doing could easily score 50 plus points if their teammates gave them the ball and all that too, so that was pretty rare as well. Even of its final iteration on the current gen, it ended up being absolutely awful. So it's very much sad of what the mode ended up becoming. But at its peak, it was really fun. It was pretty much the only beacon of light of a terrible game. And even at its origins, at least of how I played in 2K11 and 12, even when it ran differently, and even an incredible game back then, and there were still very good reasons to play even that mode, an outright incredible game. Even from its origins to 2K23, when pretty much everything about the games were awful other than the gradual improvement of stuff like MyGM and all that, I was still even able to get fun out of it. 2K23 is still one of my most hated games of all time. It's not the worst 2K ever, because again, they did improve stuff like the MyGM bit, and I was able to personally benefit off that glitch, psycho-disgusting thing. But even still, a game that probably overall, my top 5 most hated games ever, I was still able to find enough fun out of it to where even just using the same player in the same mode over and over, just add of the lore, Brian Scalabrine, and all that helped too. It's fun of his whole, or about him and legendary status and all that, too, played a part in it as well, obviously, but still, I was able to have as much fun as I had throughout all the times. Probably in total, I would say, if I had to guess, of all the games combined, I would say I played at least 1,500 player control games. And actually, now that I think about it, in some years I'd use an alternate account too. So actually, thinking of alternate accounts, probably more like 2,000. Yeah, I'd say I played at least 2,000 player control games entering that. Plenty, especially by 2K23 when the losses didn't count as losses, I'd leave. So they were all 5-minute quarters. I'm going to say on average probably 10 minutes per game of 2,000 games. So that's 20,000 minutes. I don't feel like trying to figure out what that is in hours. But I'll say 20,000 minutes-ish, very roughly, of online player control through the years. So I definitely have some experience. And overall, my most fun was not even trying to be experienced or glitchy or whatever it may be. You're just screwing around with Brian Scalabrine at the fair. And of course, throughout all the time, there's plenty worth the yeehaw, but overall, I'd say I ended it about the best way possible. Just screwing around with Brian Scalabrine and ultimately not having to worry about the glitches and all that. And getting plenty of funny clips in there, too, that y'all seen, too. So, benefit of y'all seeing the clips. I hope y'all enjoyed the clips through the years and all that. And ultimately, hopefully, what y'all are able to get enjoyment and all that too. Even if I never get to play the game again, or even the game mode, however you look at the game or the mode or whatever, it's very much sad and not worth e-haul to the point of it's very much a rant-hating type thing that ain't involved in there at all. But looking at the past of it and its experiences up to when I played it and it was removed, the future, absolutely terrible. So there's still rant-hating to it. But of the past memories and stuff, it's most certainly worth a yeehaw.